I'm talking to you though. You're the stats guy.
Yeah, we're trying
You're the
to.
stats guy, and we're the homies.
What is up, homies? We are back with another series, a brand new series I'm calling Stats Detective. I'll explain that in a second. I don't know if you can tell, I'm not really good at naming stuff, but I do like to pick a terrible name and then roll with it. So that's what we're going to do here. I would like to say this is going to be a solo series with just me. Greg and Nikki will not be making an appearance. We're going to dig into the weeds of statistics themselves, not the results of those statistics. So today you can see we are going to go through QBR, passer rating, and why they both kind of suck, and a better way of doing it. And kind of the reason that I started Stats Homies was because sports statistics a lot of times likes to do this type of thing instead of what they should do, which I'll explain later. Before we get into it, please check out our website. There you can find links to our YouTube channel, to our Instagram, and to our Patreon. Patreon is where you can get in on the conversation, so you can chat with us directly about things that maybe pique your interest if you're interested in this sort of thing. The website is where I will post articles about all the topics I do and some more context, a little bit more in depth, and maybe some like graphs and statistical analysis things that go beyond what I am willing to do in a video. So without further ado, let's get into it. To begin the conversation on sports statistics, we have to differentiate between the different types of sports statistics there are. Going from the simplest counting stats, think of completions, think of hits in baseball, think of shots made in basketball. That is the simplest level. You can then further go into a rate stat, so something like field goal percentage in football or basketball is just a number, a counting stat divided by a number of attempts. Um, these are typically good. These are typically good because they tell you exactly what they want to tell you. They don't try to do anything that might introduce a level of bias. Once you get beyond simple rates, simple division, simple multiplication, you get into advanced statistics. These are things like QBR in football, things like WAR or wins above replacement in baseball, and things like PER or player efficiency rating in basketball. These types of stats take your simple counting stats or your rate stats, and they try to combine a bunch of them to give you some number that gives you a better indication of player value, player performance, that sort of thing. So, for instance, we'll get into it a little bit later, but QBR takes a bunch of factors. Takes interceptions, touchdowns, completion percentage, completions, incompletions, sacks, all of these factors into account when evaluating a quarterback's performance. And the idea is when you take more variables into account, it'll give you a better picture of how that player performed overall as opposed to just completion percentage. That is a flawed way of thinking, a very flawed way of thinking, because the question becomes, how are you weighting these different events, and why are you weighting them the way that you are, and how are you adjusting for things like defense? How are you adjusting for things like your offense that you happen to play in, which is set by your coaches, which is not a factor of the quarterback unless you're a really high level quarterback that has some influence. We're getting into the stratosphere here, and all of these things are interdependent upon each other, and that's part of the problem. But to further delve into advanced stats and why they are really flawed, we're going to do a case study on QBR and passer rating. And we're going to start with passer rating because the formula is known. We're going to walk all the way through it. This is the formula for passer rating. So you might be thinking, well, there's a couple statistics in here, but then there's these numbers that have nothing to do with the statistics really. And you'd be right about that. So we're just going to walk through step by step the things in here that are really suspect that we should be thinking that's flawed, and the things in here that are fine and statistically either don't do anything or make sense. So I'll start with the bottom here. So once you're done calculating this portion, you divide by 6 and multiply by 100. That's just a way to normalize so that we have numbers that fall within a certain range. So I think QBR goes up to 158.3. And so this is just so that you can compare like a score of 100 to a score of 102. It just makes it a tiny bit easier to interpret. Otherwise, you'd be getting a lot smaller scores. That's why you multiply by 100 here. So we can ignore this. This is fine. It doesn't do anything to the actual number QBR. It just scales it. Okay, so we don't care about that. Now we're left with a bunch of stats. That's fast rated. We're left with a bunch of individual stats. In general, that's great, especially because these are counting stats. And we like counting stats. They tell us exactly what we want to know. I want to know how many completions did you make? How many throws did you throw that turned into yards? That's what I want to know. I want to know how many yards you got. I want to know how many times you attempted it. These are great stats. This is just completion percentage. And then there are these guys. Now these, a lot of them, are just numbers. Now, at the time that they were calculated, which was in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, this was adopted in 1973 by the NFL. But at the time that they were calculated, these might have been meaningful numbers for the offensive style of the league at that time. So let's take this for instance. You take completions over attempts. That's just completion percentage, or more appropriately, completion proportion. You subtract it by 0.3. Now, why you do that, I'm not entirely sure. And you multiply that by 5. Again, not entirely sure. It's saying that every point of completion percentage is worth 5 passer rating after you subtract off the 3. Okay, then you have this yards over attempt minus 3. Now, why would you subtract off 3? If you threw for 100 yards on 10 attempts, your this proportion would come out to 10. Then you're just going to subtract off 3 for whatever reason, and then you're going to multiply by a quarter, meaning that your yards over 10, they're saying that yards are not nearly as important as completion. We're going to multiply this by a number greater than 1 and this by a number less than 1. So we know that yards are much easier to come by than completion percentage, but are yards, let's see, 4 times 5, 20 times easier to come by? So you're saying that every yard is worth 1/20th of every completion you get. Well, that's basically saying that you should be throwing 20 yards every pass, and that's not true. So then you have, these are my favorite two to compare. So you have touchdowns over attempts, and then you have interceptions over attempts. Touchdowns over attempts are multiplied by 20. That's a big number, especially compared to these two numbers. And then you have interceptions over attempts multiplied by 25. That's an even bigger number. But what this is telling you is that for every, because the number of attempts stays the same throughout, but for every touchdown you throw, that is weighted less than every interception you throw. That is a ridiculous notion. If you have watched our videos in the past, you will know that touchdowns are worth more than interceptions. They just are. Touchdowns means you got points. An interception means your defense, well, unless it's a pick six, your defense has a chance to make a stop. And typically that stop results in fewer points than a touchdown. So why are we weighting an interception much higher? And why is this 2.375 here? I know why it's here. It's here because it's saying if you don't throw an interception, this is 0 over whatever, doesn't matter. This is 0 times whatever is 0. So it's saying if you don't throw an interception, you get 2.375 bonus passer rating points. Why 2.375? Is that all the points you saved by not throwing an interception? Again, this is an arbitrary number. It may have been the number that it was worth at the time. It is no longer the case. And furthermore, why would you just arbitrarily weight something for no reason. I mean, there's a lot of problems with this, but what I do like about passer rating is that the formula is known and that it's consistent. So even for all of its flaws, I'd actually rather that these random numbers don't change, because as soon as you start changing them, then you can't compare passer rating over a year. And passer rating is useful for telling us how has offensive style changed. Passer ratings have been going up and up and up because we've relied more and more and more on passing. And so passer rating reflects that over the years. So that's interesting. It's a historical stat. But like I said, there are problems with it. And because you're arbitrarily weighting all of these things, even if it's based on something, it's a fixed weight. And so you're going to lose predictive power because that weight might change based on the statistic or based on the situation that you find yourself in. For instance, if you are down in a game, throwing an interception is not as bad as if you are up in a game. If you're up 3 points and you throw an interception, you might have just cost yourself the win. But if you're down 3 points and you throw an interception, well, you might have been taking a risk that had a greater reward, such as winning the game, as opposed to throwing an easy check down or doing something like. That's why this weight doesn't make any sense. So I hope you understand pass rating a little more. I hope you understand that this is the way that advanced statistics are calculated across sports. It's arbitrary weighting. It makes some sense, but it doesn't allow you to predict properly the way that you want to. Now, I'm not saying there's anything bad about these stats. In fact, they do a good job. We'll see later. They do a good job of predicting outcomes in games, but I have my issues. Let's leave it at that. Then we have the darling statistic of ESPN, QBR. How is QBR calculated? We don't know. It is a proprietary statistic developed by ESPN. And my understanding is that it was developed to be passer rating plus. So passer rating is obviously flawed. ESPN saw that. And they went on to make something even more flawed. QBR, we don't know exactly what goes into the calculation for sure. I am assuming it includes all of the things that passer rating does, plus more. So I have heard on various forums and ESPN itself that it includes sacks into the calculation, and that it includes a defensive adjustment. There are problems with both of these things because now you're introducing way more noise into the model than signal. Before, all of those factors were, at least to some degree, controllable by the quarterback, right? Depending on the throw a quarterback makes, that play might result in an interception or not. However, if you get sacked from the blind side, is that the quarterback's fault? Is it the fault of the scheme of the coach? Is it the fault of the lineman who got beat and either didn't let the quarterback know? I don't know if they do that, but I assume you might yell like "watch out" or something. Whose fault was it? Well, it doesn't lie on all the quarterbacks, and so what ESPN will probably tell you is that they weighted appropriately so that the appropriate amount of guilt lies with the quarterback and is reflected in QBR. I don't believe that, but whatever. It doesn't matter. The other thing is this defensive adjustment. That is a whole can of worms, and it goes back to the same thing. If you throw a pick, now your QBR goes down, and the defense's statistics go up. So like, for instance, if you throw a pick, now that team might have gone up in the rankings if they use rankings, or might have gone up in like interception rate if that's what they use to adjust. But whose fault was it? Like, did the quarterback throw the interception? Did the defense get the interception? Well, it's probably some of both, but there's no way to appropriately weight it because it changes situation to situation. And so once you get into these sorts of adjustments where it like the quarterback may or may not have control of the situation, it really gets into it. It also, I know that it weights QBR on like garbage time. How do you define garbage time? How do you adjust for subs coming in for the defense? I don't think that the model is that verbose that that they would include all of these different things I'm talking about in the ways that you would need to in order to accurately capture quarterback performance. I just don't think that that's happening. I would love to talk to somebody at ESPN about it and see just how complicated this model is. But then you get into the problem of, in statistics, there is a concept known as overfitting your model. If you include too many signals and those signals contain more noise than actual signal, what you have done is overfitted your model, and now it's no good at predicting. We will see that in the results of the analysis that I did. And I think that it plays out here. I think they're adding too many things to their model that comes out with a number. And it just doesn't end up helping. It actually ends up hurting. So yeah, there's my rant on QBR. We will now go on to the head-to-head analysis, and we'll get a little bit more into it. Now we're getting into the actual analysis part. So it includes team data, game data. Before we get going on that, I want to say that the QBR versus passer rating thing has been done to death. I know that. You've probably all read an article or seen a video about it. So I'm not necessarily, bringing new information to the table, except for I'm going to compare it head to head with the way that I would do it if I were in charge of a team's statistical analysis plan or whatever. I wouldn't use any of these stats. So we're going to really get into the weeds here, but I would like to make a note that because all these are R-squared values, because we are comparing models, I'm not going to use the actual estimates from the models. I'm just going to tell you how well they predicted, because they're all on different scales. QBR, I believe, only goes up to 100. Passer rating goes up to 158.3. This model doesn't even have a scale because each of these are weighted differently based on the math behind it. Yeah, so that's why it's better, but whatever. To begin, if you're looking at overall team data, so this is across the whole season, you're taking win percentage and you're using passer rating or QBR to predict win percentage. QBR does a better job, like a 5% better job of predicting win percentage than passer rating does. I just want to say that this number in particular isn't super important, except when compared to the other number, because football, there's so many factors. You have defense, you have offense, you have receivers, you have dependent positions, you have coaches. I mean, all of these things factor in. The fact that a metric on quarterback performance predicts nearly 50% of win percentage, pretty astounding. It tells you exactly how important a quarterback is, and it also tells you where the league is as a whole, right? And this might change from team to team depending on your scheme, but quarterbacks in the NFL, I mean, there's a reason it's the most important position in sports. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, but QBR does a better job. QBR probably does a better job because it includes things like defense adjustments and sacks and other things. So it kind of goes beyond the scope of a quarterback rating, which means it's good for predicting overall things like this. But as you'll see with the game data, it is not great at predicting the outcomes of games because it just goes too far, and the adjustments are probably not appropriate. So if you look at point differential, now these are all linear regressions. I also did logistic regression analysis. We'll get into that in a minute. But if you do linear regression, you find that point differential is predicted by QBR at a rate of 35%. So 35% of the variance of point differential is predicted by QBR. That's pretty good. Not as good as passer rating. Passer rating predicted 41%. Now, if instead of trying to arbitrarily fit those into one number, you parse it all apart and you take completions plus completion percentage plus touchdowns plus interceptions, you get a better indicator of point differential than these ones. And you might be thinking, well, that's not fair. You put way more things in them all. These are just single variables. Well, to that I would say that's the point. Trying to get everything into a into a number that is easy to digest, that you can say on TV, is all fine and dandy until you're actually trying to predict the outcomes of games. And then it does a much worse job than if you just did it all separately. It's why things like the triple slash in baseball have become much more important than outdated statistics like batting average, or it's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. But it's because if you get a more holistic view with separate numbers of a batter's performance, that tells you a lot more than trying to get trying to calculate WAR, or trying to calculate batting average. Like, it just, information is lost. I'll also point out that I didn't use any variables in this model that were not also included in both of these models. I just took them, separated them out, and let the mathematical equation weight it appropriately, so that for the situation at hand, which is point differential, I got a better predictor of the outcome. That's how statistical models work. It's why they're better than these stats. Now, okay, there's a caveat. I understand that these statistics were not necessarily designed to predict winning or to predict points scoring or point differential. I understand that. They are more so designed to compare quarterbacks. And I appreciate that, because when it comes to comparing quarterbacks, I probably would use passer rating over QBR because you get a loss of signal. But either way, I would like a single number to do so. And then you would have to sort of, as a human being, weight that against like what defense they played against. But I appreciate that these are not designed for prediction, and this model is designed for prediction. So I am sort of rigging the game here a little bit. That being said, I would say that winning matters beyond quarterback performance. I know if a quarterback's stuck on a bad team, they're in a corner, it's hard to say that winning is the end all be all for quarterbacks. And yet, what do we value in a quarterback? Well, we value Tom Brady winning 7 rings. We value guys that are able to lift their team, Joe Burrow, out of a terrible situation and elevate them to winning that gets them to the playoffs, right? That's ultimately what we care about. That's ultimately what teams care about. That's ultimately what fans care about. We want to see our teams win. I don't really care if my quarterback did 5 points better on QBR last night. Like, there's no moral victories. You know what I mean? If they lost the game, I'm mad about it. So that's why this model is better, because it tells us more what we want to know, which is, how did that quarterback impact the outcome of the game? That's what I care about, at least. We can agree to disagree, but yeah, there's one more bit of information that you need, and we will see that in a second. In addition to running simple linear regression models to look at the differences between the 3 different ways we can predict winning via various metrics, I also ran an odds model, that is to say, a conditional logistic regression model. It's conditional because every game has a winner and a loser, and I wanted to include all the data, so you have to account for that. And similarly, a linear mixed model, it's mixed because you have to add a random effect for the game, because you have to account for the fact that one team lost and one team won, necessarily. So to calculate the rankings here, I use something called the Akake information criterion. It's a very commonly used way to compare models that use differing variables. So just in case you were wondering about that, my model that I fit, which by the way includes less information theoretically than the other two, was better. It's better than both passer rating and QBR. And if you were doing a rigorous statistical analysis, it's the model you would go with if you had competing hypotheses or something like that. Passer rating was also just better than QBR. And so it begs the question, if you had all this time from 1973 to whenever QBR was invented, and you had all that information, all that data, how did you come up with a worse statistic than the one that already existed? So, in future analyses, I'm going to put this thing to bed. This has been beat to death. I hope you understand now a little bit better why passer rating and QBR are flawed. It basically comes down to the fact that they are arbitrarily weighted. Um, yeah, it's why they don't do a great job. Now, can we still use them to compare quarterback performance? I think yes. I really think yes, and I think going forward, I will use passer rating. I'm not going to use QBR. I have too many problems with it. Passer rating, at least it's a known. The issues are known. QBR, we have no way of knowing if they're doing things correctly or not. Yeah, but whichever way you slice it, a full statistical model is just better at predicting the types of things that you as fans, or if you're betting, obviously you care about prediction way more than you care about, you know, Dak Prescott was better than Brock Purdy. Like, that doesn't matter to you. If you're trying to make some money, you need the actual prediction. And at the end of the day, I was better at it. No. I hope you take this all with the grain of sand too, that it's not like these did a bad job. Um, QBR and passer rating, both very significant predictors of winning, both linearly and when you use an odds model. So, I mean, I would be comfortable if you only had access to one of these three ways of modeling. I would be comfortable with any of them, to be honest with you. They're highly significant. They have good R squared values. If you put other values into the model, like defense, like sacks, like special teams play, you're gonna come up with a pretty good prediction, I think. But if you're going purely based on the predictive inferential power of the different ways to model, yeah, it doesn't get any better than keeping it simple and including statistics by themselves. So I hope you got a little bit out of that. This was also sort of a defense of my approach and the way that I'm trying to change the way that we think about statistics in sports, because I mean, sports have come a long way in terms of statistics, but there's still a lot of problems with it. And so um, I think that, also, to be fair, I know at this point this video is getting pretty long, but I would also just like to say that I know that teams are doing this sort of thing. Like, if you go into the Cardinals facility, their stats team is definitely doing stuff like this, and they're probably doing some machine learning, which we will also do on this channel. They're probably doing some machine learning and some AI algorithms to even further improve on this sort of stuff. But what is available to the public is just way less nuanced, right? If you flip on ESPN or Colin Cowherd, you will hear passer rating reported as if it's this perfect thing, and it's like, well, I don't think that it is. Again, if you're using it to compare quarterbacks, it's probably fine. If you're using it to, like, tell an audience how much a quarterback did, or how well a quarterback did, or how much a quarterback impacted winning, it just doesn't do a great job. Um, yeah, when compared to more robust methods. So that is it. Thank you guys if you watch this whole thing. I really doubt that you watch this whole thing. If you're actually watching this, you should definitely subscribe. Um, this got pretty long and in the weeds, but I had fun doing it because I like statistics. So yeah, if you also like statistics, stick around. There'll be a lot more of this. Thank you.